Конечно. Дорогие друзья, давайте начинать.
Well, we should start right now. We are behind the schedule already. So I hope the speakers will be very brief and will speak faster for us to finish at 4 o'clock, because there is a panel after us, so we will be more disciplined. I am Vitaly Nedelsky. I am the head of the National Association of Industrial Internet Market, Smart Network Market, Cyber Physical Market. So the topic of our roundtable are the risks and threats that are associated with implementing such systems. So you have to pay for any kind of convenience, and in this case the payment are the following risks. And we will be discussing it from many levels in terms of city economy, in terms of protection, security for the systems, and eventually I would like us to also touch upon the balance between the risks and the capacity to absorb that risk. Well, we should proceed. Traditionally, at this forum, we first give the floor to the representatives of Moscow, Deputy Head of Department of IT of the City of Moscow, Alexander Gorbatko. Please, Alexander, the floor is yours. Yes, well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, today we don't have a lot of people here. I don't see a lot of audience, but the topic probably it's not exactly professional. It's relevant for everyone, for every person. The more we deal with informatization, concentrating IT systems, the greater is the chance that the system fails. You know, we are accustomed to that. Yeah, well, you know, if you take the phone from the people, they will be afraid, and there are a lot of services in Moscow. We are very serious about it. We have about 350 informational systems that are open to the city dwellers. We have more than 6 million Muscovites who use the platform of city services. Well, those IT systems in Moscow, we understand that there is a reverse. There is a risk such as security of data and its capacity to absorb risks. Well, why we provide services to the people? We provide at the same time guarantees that these services will work and will operate. This is our task. Not only to provide service, but to maintain it at a high level with a lot of users, with a lot of requests at a short period of time. Because initially, 5 years ago, when we started the program Informational City, we did not have IT systems back then. Now, Moscow megapolis is acknowledged. Artemy Valerievich, our minister, said that we are one of the 5 top smart cities in the world that promote IT services. Well, at the same time, we understand that those systems, and well, the fact that people trust us with their data. We are not a bank, but people do trust us with our systems. They conduct payments through our systems. They introduce personal information there. So it's informational safety. It's not just a word. It's everyday work of a huge department. The initial solutions that we selected for the city were built on safe to fail, failure safety. We have data security. We have an inside network with 400,000 computers of the government of the city of Moscow, major mobile phone operators too. So we do cooperate with the regulators, with regulating authorities, and with the bank industry too, because they know how to deal with cyber threats. They know the trends that are in place, and there at our department we created a technical service that controls the city systems and monitors their state, including access and safety. The last viruses have shown that we do everything correctly. None of our services broke down. Well, what is a virus? A virus, administrator of a certain network fail to renew their systems or fail to upload or install the latest antivirus system. So there's nothing that specific or that new about those new viruses. It happens everywhere, all the time, every 30 seconds. Someone tries to break into our city systems. We are accustomed to that. Well, the organizing element is that we need a correct culture, correct attitude to IT systems, IT support, IT, uploading new versions. From the administrator to the end user. When you get your passport, you don't throw it around. You store it in a locker or somewhere at home. Well, you shouldn't tell anyone your login or password to the people you see on the street. So you start with simple steps. And a month ago, we have conducted, well, in May, at the Ministry of Education, we have conducted a month of training where we would tell pupils, teachers, what are the correct ways to use those goods and those conveniences that surround us. While, well, there is also, we have tried to explain them the possible threats. So this is like ABC of informational security. If people have this culture, it would be quite simple to protect data and security systems. And now we will hear from our colleagues too. Alexander, I have a minor question. Well, could you mention one biggest challenge that, or the thing that is most annoying to you in your work? Well, yes. The ever-growing request and demand for our IT systems. Well, because when we provide a new service, there are huge crowds of users instantly. It's not a bad thing, but it might be difficult. When you build a car that can carry 3 tons of cargo, and suddenly you need to transport 7 tons of cargo, it's hard. So the intensive growth that you cannot stop. While working, you need to enhance the system to cater to the ever-growing needs. So the problem of growth. As for fast-growing companies, when they need to change organizational structure, their governance methods, yes, it's kind of the same, yes. Well, you see the stress and the growing demand. So how much staff do you have? How much people work for you, for your department? Well, the department itself is about 60 people, but we do have contractors, our sub-bodies, Mosgor Telecom, engineers. We do have other bodies. Well, around 1,000 people are employed. Well, it's a small army, isn't it? Yes? Yes, it is. That helps every branches of the government and all the services provided to our population, be that healthcare, paying their fines, etc. Well, the level of your responsibility and the scale of this megalopolis, maybe it's not that big of an army. You see, in Moscow concentrates around 70 or 80% of the country's resources. Well, 12 million people living in Moscow, and we believe that every day there are 15 million people in Moscow, well, including guests, tourists, people from the Moscow region. Yes, a lot of people are concentrated here. They use electronic services. Okay, so we should move on. And among our panelists, we have the person who works in a global company, not only global, but one of the pioneers of IT, and many of your contemporaries, contemporaries of IBM, have already disappeared. Not everyone survived the last decades, merging, acquisitions, changing business models. Alexei Vorontsov is the leading expert on information security at IBM. Alexei, please, could you share your global vision? Not only the specifically about safety, but I mean globally. Moscow has its own perspective. We compare ourselves to other cities inevitably, but you see the whole picture. Your customers provide you with that kind of information. So could you please share your position with us?
Dear colleagues, I often say that we're living in a bad world. Why is that? I've been engaged in IT security for more than 15 years, and I never regretted my choice. And with each coming year, I enjoy even more working in this field, which unfortunately means for us, common people, the lives becoming less and less secure. When my goal is becoming more global, it means that informational security is lacking for the common citizens. Just 5 years ago, informational security and even common viruses will become some very specific news materials. Actually, what's happening now? BBC and other major channels are talking about the viruses. This is how IT security importance is becoming more and more crucial with each year. Yes, it is more interesting for me as a specialist, but it means higher risk for the common people. Once we introduce the smart aspect into any field, it means that I will need to take care about this field, about this sphere in my job. We're talking about smart cities. We are talking a lot about the smart devices, smart watches, smart cars, smart glasses, smartphones, and smart cities finally. Once we add a smart aspect, it means that this field is becoming more risky. What is the main problem of information security? It needs to be engaged in, and it needs a number of specialists, a number of high competent specialists. When we're talking about some certain users, yes, we can allocate the necessary specialists. But when we're talking about the cities, about the big organizations, corporations, they can afford themselves hire a security department, but the common citizens cannot do that. This is how smart cities are developing now. Smart city, as it is a concentration of information technologies. It has a very huge risk of interference, and this is why it demands huge investments. It means that you need to have your own IT specialist team, which will be engaged in providing IT security. What's happening now? The cities are trying to turn this function, so-called function, into their benefit, into their advantage. If previously the city could use IT services just to connect to the payment systems in order to pay for the electricity, some other household costs, now we're talking about informational security. So the city is becoming first an IT service provider, and then it's becoming an absolutely new security provider. There have been a few common projects, including the IBM company. For example, there was a case in Australia. So it seems that this topic is very interesting. This is how we can turn some budget cost into a very effective and advantageous benefit. Moscow hasn't yet enjoyed this experience of cooperation yet, but it is not even hiring 1,000 specialists is not enough to provide IT security for all the citizens if you take into consideration the total amount of these users. If we're talking about, but if normally there is a saying like if there an administrator, if a manager doesn't has enough free time, it means that he is not busy enough. But are you concerned with these risks? Are you engaged in all that problem solving? Of course, we are engaged in that. How about infrastructural networks, maybe heating systems, transport systems? Of course, there should be some kind of cooperation in these terms, right? Otherwise, the viruses will somehow get into those systems. Or if electric power supply finds himself under certain risk, it means that all the Moscow citizens will face those risks. Of course, we're not talking only about the power grids. We're also talking about the water supply channels, water supply network, and with the growth of informatization, the more cooperation with the security specialists it is demanded. We have the municipal security committee in which we discuss the risks and the threats related to that topic. But of course, there are some certain internal security departments. If we are talking about the politics, we are talking about some cities or the minor unions. Well, so there should be some kind of institution, some kind of bodies like those committees that should be aware of the city threats and the city's risks. When we hire young, very competent teams, we are actually doing that for the city demands, for the city benefit. We are trying to create an environment which will enable the business to grow even more. So we're not talking about the IT security specialists, but also with other specialists and experts from other fields. As we have mentioned, viruses are gaining more and more attention and are getting more important. Probably it will be big enough when a virus will be sitting next to us here at a round table and expressing its opinion. Viruses we're not talking only about the like in the nature, when we cannot eliminate all the viruses and all the natural risks. This is how we cannot eliminate all the informational risks and informational viruses. The Kaspersky lab knows everything about viruses, and I'm really proud to be acquainted to you. And this is one of the very few Russian companies which is widely known in the world.
How did you manage to do that, and what's coming next? How did you manage what? Well, become so cool, I mean, in terms of information security. Well, hard labor, skills. We were just interested, you know. That's what made it real. Apart from the fact that the topic is in high demand, and as Alexei said, for the last 15 years, the interest is only increasing. To this, in the Kaspersky lab, that's what I work. The topic of informational security, I've been doing that since the last century. And I can only corroborate what was said. Well, to my mind, the further we go, the more will be the demand, the greater it will be. There are many reasons for that. I think that we every day there are more than 70,000 antivirus records across the globe. None of them are unique, but just imagine the figure. Alexander has said that, every 30 seconds there is an attack on the Moscow information system, and the figures only increase with time. So a great share of this development is accounted by the fact that IT systems are immature in terms of informational security. The system has not yet reached its maturity. Well, normally, I would not like to generalize too much. Well, a normal, clear, understandable development of an IT system, and we could expand that. Well, let's say about functionality, business value. Let us have the system working, and when the system works, it turns out that, well, there are other issues too, but information security, one threat, second threat, third threat, and we add additional layers or tools to the system that are designed to solve particular problems or general problems, so they are not part of the system's architecture. It's just an addition, something that is later added to close a gap or to solve some trouble, let's say. In my view, and that's where we are moving, basically, and that's where we allocate a lot of our resources there in Kaspersky Lab. It's to make the systems sustainable, resilient in terms of IT threats. Not just, adding an antivirus, but the architecture of the system needs to be resilient. Whatever happens to it, it needs to carry out its major functions, at least the most important ones, regardless of DDoS attacks, viruses, etc. Well, in that sense, lastly, we see a trend, Internet of Things included, well, when we see this new movement. Well, there is a lot of being said about security being integrated, like the human immune system. Let's draw an analogy, a biological analogy. The human has designed, or has at least acquired through the evolution, a tool to protect oneself. Well, of course, one can have a flu or a cold, but anyway, human exists as a species, and the person functions even with a cold. So that's the analogy that we want with information system. Within the architecture, the system needs to include resilience towards external threats. Well, for that, what is needed is, firstly, basic tools. Well, to use such basic tools that are already well known, that have a good record in terms of system resilience. For instance, qualified specialists who know how to use those tools, continuous learning, and just a couple of words more about the topic that was touched upon before me, the interaction between informational infrastructures, between themselves, major infrastructures. In terms of IT security, there is a notion such as model of threats. The threat model corresponds to reality. If we look at a bigger surface, well, let's imagine you have a complex system that is comprised of several subsystems, where one of them might be absolutely safe, indestructible. Well, the example was also given about electricity in Moscow. Well, let's think about the transportation. Let's imagine a system that is immune to threats. But, well, no electricity, no transportation, though. If you take the energy away, there will be no transport. So, the effect in terms of the bad guys, if they target a subsystem of a major system, they might kill the system in general, the system itself. So the architecture of the system needs to be designed in such a way that it should be resilient toward inner and outer events that might take it out. Well, then this is much more than just viruses. So whose problem is it? Designers, developers, IT systems developers, or the state needs to think about it? So, well, depends on the kind of a threat. It's if an ecological threat, it's the government's responsibility. Well, as you have just said, those are cyber-physical systems. Unlike our experience 3-5 years ago, when we would talk only about IT systems, now we're talking about cyber-physical systems. Through IT, you now might affect electricity. You might take physical electricity out. Or, well, in terms of smart cities, if you look at it, yes, the state should, this is the state's responsibility. The state should be the first one to understand, well, the state understand well, I will not be negative about the state right now. Well, what needs to be clear that this is a challenge that needs to be solved, and funds should be allocated for this task. Well, I mean, requirements to the systems that are procured or bought by the state. Let's imagine the cycle of development that at any point can be initiated and it will transform. But, well, the first thing are technical requirements, always. But before that, you need to be aware of the problem. If you acknowledge the problem, then there are technical specifications, funds, companies who have the skills to do that, qualified experts, training programs. So the cycle develops and grows. It's like vaccines. You had a disease and then you're immune to it, like vaccination. So all those shots, they play the role of the vaccine. They teach us that, you know, the next time you will be hit on the head, so you need to prepare. Well, I'm happy that those are minor shots. Yeah, but we need to get stronger, not to catch a cold all the time. We are not talking about surgery, not about therapy, but about prevention. Prevention and strengthening our immunity. Yes, prophylactics is the best measure to fight viruses. Well, but you need to be aware, you need to be conscious of the fact. We should now move forward since we don't have a lot of time left. Now I will give the floor to Martin Tom Pettersson, who represents the Smart City Catalyst company. Tom, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Martin Tom Petersen. I come from a Danish consultancy, solely working on IT, innovation, and cybersecurity governance. We've been a part of We've done several reports for, among others, Homeland Security. We've done reports on cyber physical security and privacy issues in the EU from the new EU Data Protection and Privacy Act. We have been co-author on securing a safe and secure municipal drone program. And lastly, but not least, we've created a report on how to actually create a safe smart city for the Danish government. So I will take some of the collaborations, Securing Smart Cities, which is a volunteer initiative, non-profit, where we have a lot of security companies working, including Kaspersky. If we look at the threat landscape at the moment, you can see this is what we're facing as a city, but we need to understand what are the ramifications when a city is hit by this. It's we need to plan and map for the worst case scenario if if the service isn't working. So we talked about that the electricity didn't work, but what are the ramifications of that? So a city needs to map that and create clear contingencies plans for that. And what, in terms of ramification and in terms of planning for emergency assessment team to actually do something. What we've figured out in analyzing different smart cities in Northern Europe was that the known struggle was funding towards security and the investment in security. I know that the last couple of weeks the security companies have been quite busy due to the many viruses hitting across Europe. And one of the things as well is the manpower in the different cities are still not sufficient, and they don't have the right competencies to actually deal with the threats. They use external clients, or companies. They don't always own the systems, which also creates a different problem because they're not able to actually update the systems even if there is a security gap. So if we're looking at some of the things we actually can do is actually organize the legal framework so when a city goes into a tendering for a new system, you actually push the risk towards the vendors. So the vendor commits to actually pen testing their system, their solution on a regular basis. You of course have the normal organizational awareness that you need always to say to your organization. Alexander, you talked about your training citizens and your own people within within the ministry, and then you have the normal IT governance, which mainly persist in actually just running and maintaining the systems. It actually doesn't cover the whole security aspect, and this is where you actually really create a gap. Also then you have the shifting of operational responsibilities, where you actually have the different departments actually owning the systems, because you are buying into an intelligent traffic system, but it is not the normal IT department's responsibility. The responsibility is in the transport ministry or department. So they need to become IT knowledgeable to actually understand what they're actually buying into and what are the security issues. And one of the key issues in terms of actually being smart is that the many solutions you mentioned, Andre, you mentioned IoT, and this is a huge issue because the validation and trust in protocols and standards are not enough. You have a lot of systems, a lot of new innovative systems, but they are still not secure, and it will result in you would actually be able to manipulate the solutions and the information stream which the city is relying on. So you might see a traffic accident, but there's no traffic accident. You might have red lights everywhere, and you would have chaos. One of the key incentives we need to put out for the cities is actually creating a bounty program for actually hacking your own city. So you actually, instead of people want to do ill will towards your systems, you actually create a bounty program. So you actually get people to actually test the systems to all of its weaknesses, and this is very important because you cannot have the brain power needed all the time for every system, and it's just a matter of knowledge into all the different systems. And when you want to hack something, you have to decompose and look at every component so you know where you can exploit. And this is not even, it's not possible for any one company to have that. And then you have the multiple coupling for data sharing and dependencies, which you would very much need to look at, because once you do the mapping, you will figure out that a lot of the systems are very much dependent on, once you go towards being a smart city, that all of the information which you actually need to control and govern the city, if the systems are not available, what happens then? It's a very, very bad scenario, because we already, everyone is talking about real-time insight, real-time movement, dynamic trafficking, but it's simply not possible if the systems are not well thought out. So one of the biggest questions is actually that cybersecurity is dynamic and evolutionary. Can we avoid being breached? My thesis is actually we can't avoid it. So why do we plan to avoid this? We should plan for being down and offline. And what is the lowest baseline we can actually live with? So, and then you have the normal international ISO standards. Is it enough to actually secure your city? It's not. It's a static checkbox exercise. You have IT best practices. It doesn't help if your department does it, but if once the solution or vendors don't do it, because software and hardware is a matter of choice in terms of going right or left when building the systems. And the next is actually how do we actually mitigate the risk? And this is one of the key things, is actually being able to pen test the solutions, both from your side but also from outside. And this is what we're seeing. Most of the European cities are actually working on.
Thank you, Martin. Коллеги, в завершении, да, может быть, подводя какой-то итог.
Well, summing it up. You remember 9/11 when the Twin Towers were collapsed? You remember how much the security costs increased rapidly all around the world, and we all have costs, and we all have some certain spendings that's happen to those extreme situations, because we lose time, we miss our flights, etc. Where is the reasonable balance between the necessary security level and the original demand for it? Because the locker cannot be bigger than the door that it secures. Who has anything to comment to that?
Well, Moscow does not assess it in terms of money. Of course, money needs to be spent. As Andrei correctly said, the thing is not to build something and then to create an additional safety structure. No, it's about integrating on an initial stage, an architectural stage, those elements that are safe to threats, that will not be affected as a human system to viruses, for instance. Well, over the last year, the budget of the Information Town program in Moscow to provide IT systems, communications, surveillance is about 40 billion. Last year, we have spent about 500 million on information safety of our communication systems. Apart from the technical solutions, building the systems themselves, communication channels, etc. Well, security is not about antiviruses for us, no. It's about the architecture, about how the systems are built and how they grow, and they grow really actively now. Well, antiviruses, cyber protection, well, that kind of safety, we've spent 500 million, but our overall budget in Moscow is 40 billion. But that, yes, in terms of architecture, tariffs, etc. Andrei, would you like to add something? Yes. Well, when you invest money in sustainable architecture, this money will be much more efficient in terms of information security than the money then are spent additionally and later. Sustainability and resilience, prophylactics, is cheaper than extra measures taken later. So, well, you will run out of business eventually thus, no? Yeah, well, we are making it happen ourselves. Well, of course, there will be such products that will still be in demand. It's like building houses. If you build a house without sewage, without electricity, without proper foundation, it will be extremely expensive to introduce those conveniences that we are accustomed to have in every apartment. Then that's no different. Yes, that is probably the key outtake that was present in every speech, in every presentation. I mean, foundations, systematic requirements that are formulated by the customer. In terms of costs, Vitaly was correct to say that, the lock should not be bigger than the door. And costs on security and safety should not be bigger than the cost of the protected item or entity itself. It makes no sense. However, when we are saying, or when we are going back to the topic of smart cities, well, the security, the security, IT security that we are discussing, we have decided those are cyber physical systems. It means that it deals with people's safety, social issues too. You see, those simple and clear approaches about safety not being more expensive than the unit itself, well, it doesn't work, in my view, because we need to take into consideration such facts as, well, in money equivalent, it's very hard to express them in money equivalent. Anyway, those projects, when it can be calculated, it's about 10% of the general cost. 10% is reasonable, is well accepted by the customers. They understand. It can be more or can be less, but this is just, the average. Okay, so we have respected the schedule, and thanks to everyone, thanks to those who spoke and to those who listened, and in 10 minutes, the next roundtable will start here in blockchain and utilities. So that's where we wrap